Good morning, everyone. This is a hearing of the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board. It's a hearing being held by the board into an application by the municipality of the County of Kings, who have applied under Section 369 of the Municipal Government Act to confirm the number of councillors to be elected at 9 and to alter, revise some of the boundaries of the polling districts. This review, again, is made to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board. We're hearing the matter. We have a three-person panel to consider the matter. My name is Roland DeVoe. I'll be chairing the this panel. With me are my colleagues Richard Melanson and Kathleen McManus. As always, these hearings are recorded, and the hearing assistant is Rob Norwood. I just give some context as to why we're here. Under the Municipal Government Act, every 8 years, every municipality in the province has to conduct a study into the reasonableness and appropriateness of their the number and boundaries of their polling districts, and obviously council size and the boundaries, as I said. So the last proceeding was in 2014. 8 years goes by pretty fast, and here we are. The applications had to be done by the end of 2022, and we received that from Kings, and so that's why we're here today. So I'll ask the municipality, before we begin, perhaps to identify who's here on behalf of the municipality. I see Mr. Conrad. Good morning.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Welcome to the municipality of the County of Kings. So to my right, I have Yanni Postema, who's our municipal clerk. And as a way, by means of a brief introduction, Yanni's been sort of instrumental in coordinating all the different components, whether it's the public engagement and consultation aspects. To my far left, we have Holly Sanford. Ms. Sanford is a GIS technician, and I refer to her as the geospatial guru, for lack of a better term, at this process. So redrawing polygons and making sure we have voter parity and the multitude of combinations to see if we could keep, to the extent possible, communities of interest within one polling district, as example. And then to my immediate left here, we have Mr. Hagen, Dan Hagen. And Dan comes to us through experience in the engineering consulting space, and has principally led us in creating filters, which we looked at various combinations of polling districts and ranked those, and has actually been the author of the report. And with your indulgence, I would suggest that Mr. Hagen would be leading us through the overview of the presentation. That's who we have here with us this morning.
Okay.
Thank you.
Having been involved in, I think this is my fourth or fifth review, and both as a lawyer and with the board, these applications have changed over time. Now with the availability of GIS data and digitized data, census data, it's certainly changed the dynamic of how these the studies and the hearings go forward. Are you all potentially going to testify? Because I'd like to affirm all of you if that's the case.
Yes, please.
Okay. So perhaps we'll start with you, Mr. Conrad. Do you declare or affirm everything you say in this proceeding will be the truth?
I do.
Ms. Postema, do you affirm everything you say in this proceeding will be the truth?
I do.
Ms. Sanford, do you affirm that everything you say in this proceeding will be the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And Mr. Hagen, do you declare that everything you say in this proceeding will be the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Okay. So what we'll do, we'll ask you to present the application, lead us through how we got to today. I do note that I should have mentioned that, as is the case, we do advertise. We did advertise this hearing and we asked for anyone to file letters of comment or request to speak. We did receive one request to speak. Chris Kane, is he here? Okay, so he's here. So what we'll do is we'll listen to what Kings has to say. The board may have some questions, and after they're finished, Mr. Kane, we'll ask you to come up and give you an opportunity to speak. Okay, so Mr. Hagan, if you want to start.
Good morning, Panel Chair DeVoe and members Melanson and McManus. On behalf of the municipality of the County of Kings, we are here today to present to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board a summary of our boundary review study that was prepared per the requirements of Section 369 of the Municipal Government Act. The scope of the municipality's boundary review study included a consultative review of the number of municipal councillors and polling districts and a detailed geospatial analysis of a range of polling district boundaries. Our goal for the study was to determine the optimum configuration of councillors and polling district boundaries that best met with Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board criteria, with a specific focus on fairness and reasonableness, as required by Section 369(1) of the MGA. The boundary review team formed by the municipality included a diverse multidisciplinary group of staff members overseen by the CAO, including the municipal clerk, strategic project specialist, GIS technician, communication specialist, policy analyst, the manager of community development with a specific focus on the diversity lens, and the administrative assistant. Throughout the boundary review study, many of our staff members at the municipality assisted the boundary review team in varying aspects of the project according to their field of interest or discipline, but the core group was made up of the 7 staff persons noted above. A communications plan was initiated in August 2022 for the purpose of directing our promotions, education, and communications efforts. It identified our interest in using a mix of online and offline, internal and external communication channels to encourage citizen and stakeholder engagement during the comment period. There were multiple ways that the communications plan intended to encourage stakeholder participation, including public engagement sessions, an online boundary review survey, an online interactive map, and written submissions. As part of the municipality's advertising initiatives, a diverse selection of media sources were used to disseminate information to the public, including 3 different newspapers, 3 different radio stations, targeted ads through a digital advertising service, 4 issues of our e-newsletter known as MOK Today. Our municipal website had a specific boundary review page with information and resources for its taxpayers. Information in our tax mailings was provided to 24,200 property owners. 18,000 flyers were sent through the county as part of flyer services, and a significant social media effort, including the use of Facebook and Twitter. As part of the boundary review project, the municipality held 5 public engagement sessions between September 27th and October 20th, 2022, with 4 of the events attended by the general public and 1 event attended by citizen appointees to the municipal standing committees. 3 of the events were held here in Central Kings County in the council chambers at the municipal office in Coldbrook, while 2 events were held in Eastern and Western Kings County in Port Williams and Kingston, respectively. 25 people attended the events in person and 5 attended online, for a total of 30 public participants over the 5 events. With respect to public comments on the issue of council size, opinions were varied on to whether to keep council size consistent at 9 members or to increase or decrease the size of council. Based on the participation at the public engagement sessions, keeping council the same size or allowing for a minor increase was heard more often than reducing the size of council. With respect to district boundaries, public comments varied much more than they did on council size. Many options or areas of interest were noted by the public during the 5 public engagement events, and not all of them could be acted upon or were ultimately possible, but we did have some areas of interest that were brought up consistently by the public that ended up being areas of focus for the boundary review team. One common theme was the idea of having only 1 village in each district, if at all possible. This became a very important factor for our team's review of district boundaries. Other frequently discussed areas of interest included the historic African Nova Scotian community of Gibson Woods, which is currently in the area of 3 districts, The Kingston, Greenwood, and Aylesford villages, are they one community of interest or are they separate communities? The area of East Berwick, which is currently in District 7 but is immediately adjacent to District 6. The southern boundary of District 6 near Colebrook, where it intersects with District 7. And the White Rock Deep Hollow Road area, which is currently part of District 7 but adjacent to both District 8 and 9. We understand these points all relate to eliminating areas of confusion or to keep all communities of interest intact within one district. Our online boundary review survey was initiated on September 9th, 2022, and was open to the public until October 21st, 2022. At the time of closing, a total of 301 responses were received from the public regarding the boundary review project. In summary, and based on the public respondents to the online survey, public sentiment was behind keeping the number of councils at 9 councillors. However, public sentiment was generally uncertain with respect to district boundaries within the municipality. A similar online survey was prepared for members of council, and 9 of the 10 members of council provided responses. Based on the responses received from members of council, it appeared that the majority of council believed that 9 councillors is the most appropriate number, which was consistent with the public sentiment on the survey. Council respondents appeared to have more confidence than the general public that the current electoral polling district boundaries are appropriate and fair. However, it was also apparent that there was sentiment on council that some boundaries could be improved to better serve communities in the county, and some communities of interest currently span 2 polling districts. As part of the boundary review process, our team utilized many key factors that helped to influence our recommended configuration of the revised polling district boundaries. These key factors included items that are required by the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board and the MGA, and the municipality's commitment to public engagement and other pre-existing municipal factors. The key factors we used included the ability of districts to accommodate for population or electoral growth, communities of interest, councillor workload, current polling divisions, fire districts, general service areas or communities, geography or geographic size, the number of electors, population density, public and council engagement, public and council survey review comments, relative parity of voting power, and school districts. As part of the preliminary review and development of the alternative scenarios for the project, a preliminary list and mapping of 12 alternative scenarios was prepared by the boundary review team. Subsequently, as part of our detailed evaluation of the alternative scenarios, we listened to the public and papered what we'd heard in the engagement process, and then narrowed down our options down to a list of 5 alternative scenarios based on our key factors. The shortlisted alternative scenarios were reviewed and considered in detail, were identified as Alternative 1, status quo, 9 districts. Alternative 2, 9 districts, version 1. Alternative number 3, 9 districts, version 2. Alternative 4, 8 districts. And alternative 5, 10 districts. Through our evidence-based process, we came to our recommended configuration, which was established as Alternative 3, 9 districts, version 2. With respect to our recommended configuration, the average number of voters per district in this 9-district model was 4,367, with a 10% variance of 437 voters. The highest voter target value at plus 10% was therefore 44,803 voters, and the lowest voter target value at minus 10% was calculated to be 3,930 voters. Based on the detailed geospatial analysis and district boundary orientations for the recommended configuration, all proposed districts were noted to meet with the requirements of the MGA and the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board with respect to relative parity of voting power, and specifically to maintain the percent variation from the average number of voters per district of plus or minus 10%. The recommended configuration allowed for 4 of the 7 villages located within individual districts, which included the villages of Canning, Port Williams, New Minas, and Aylesford. While under the recommended configuration, the proposed District 4 included both the villages of Greenwood and Kingston within one district, and together they were identified as a community of interest. Only the village of Cornwallis Square was not able to be included in a singular district, given its expansive land area and lack of centralized core population. Attempting to put the village of Cornwallis Square within a singular district would have resulted in the splitting of communities of interest like Coldbrook, Cambridge, and Waterville, etc. On the following images, the bold black lines outline the The bold black outlines denote the recommended district boundaries for our study, while the different colors are reflective of the existing current districts. As part of the recommended configuration, Districts 1 and 2 were reorganized in a north-south orientation in order for District 1 and District 2 to each have a village within their boundaries. The southern-northern border between the two proposed districts was established using a geographically significant boundary, the Canard River. Additionally, the community of Centerville, a growth center in the county, was included in the proposed District 1, given its location along Highway 221, a main thoroughfare between Canning and Centerville, and its close regional association with agricultural areas of District 1. As noted on the previous slide, the geographically significant boundary of the Canard River was established as the northern boundary of the proposed District 2, with the village of Port Williams and the growth center of North Kentville and the Department of National Defense Camp Aldershot contained within the district. The southern boundary of the proposed District 2 was established by the geographic boundary of the Cornwallis River and the district's border with the town of Kentville. As part of the reorganization of the boundaries within District 1, the historical African Nova Scotian community of Gibson Woods, which is located near Centerville and Sheffield Mills, is now wholly within a singular district, District 1, whereas previously it was split between two districts and was immediately adjacent to a third. For voter parity purposes, the community of Keddy's Corner, which was formerly in District 2, was included in District 3. District 4 was updated to include the village of Kingston and all of the village of Greenwood. Under the current status quo scenario, the village of Greenwood and the village of Aylesford are both divided between Districts 4 and 5, which was deemed to not be consistent with our mandate to adequately consider communities of interest. The changes to the polling district boundaries through District 4 are deemed to be a significant improvement from a communities of interest perspective from our current state, as well as to improve the ability of District 4 to accommodate growth. District 5 was updated to include all of the village of Aylesford, Department of National Defense 14 Wing Greenwood, and the rural areas to the south. Similar to the proposed district changes, the proposed changes to District 4, the changes to District 5 have better addressed communities of interest by not dividing them, as well as accommodating for electorate growth in the future. District 6 was expanded to the eastern boundary of the town of Berwick, and the southern boundary was extended to include areas near Thompson Road, Spittal Road, English Mountain Road, Lockhart Mountain Road, and Harrington Road to help mitigate against voter confusion in these areas. A small area in the vicinity of Randolph and Waterville Mountain Road was added to District 7 for voter parity reasons. In order to address voter parity in District 7, areas from the western areas of District 5 were added to District 7, including the populated areas around Factorydale, Morristown, and Aylesford Lake. As noted on the previous slide, a small area in the vicinity of Randolph and Waterville Mountain Road was added to District 7 for voter parity reasons. As part of the boundary review process, no changes were applied to District 8, and all of the village of New Minas and the community of Greenwich remain within District 8. And finally, the parts of the community of White Rock that are currently part of District 7 were added to District 9, so that the populated areas of the community of White Rock would all be within District 9 instead of being divided between two districts. Also, this was needed to address voter parity issues in District 9 with respect to a low electoral population. In summary, our boundary review study resulted in the following 9 districts within the municipality of the County of Kings, created through an intensive evidence and consultative-based process using the list of key factors noted earlier in this presentation as a guide. All of the 9 proposed districts meet with our mandate of maintaining voter parity within a plus or minus 10% threshold and focus significantly on maintaining communities of interest within our municipality. Therefore, with respect to our boundary review study and the requirements to assess the number of councillors and district boundaries in our municipality, our recommendation to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board is to maintain the number of councillors at 9 members and reconfigure the polling district boundaries in a fair and reasonable manner and with a specific focus on voter parity and communities of interest, as well as the other key factors influencing the recommended configuration. Thank you, members of the board, for your time today. We are prepared to entertain any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hagan. And actually, I can assure you that the board is well aware of Kings and its geography, both obviously various hearings we've had over the years, and I know at least 2 members are from the southwestern part of the province, so we travel through this municipality quite often, so we're well aware of the geography, and thank you for your presentation. And I congratulate you actually of all the applications we've received. Your study that you did was obviously one of the most comprehensive in terms of your public consultation process and the way you went about doing it. So congratulations. You should be commended for the effort you put in this work to bring us today. So we do have questions. So we'll start with Mr. Melanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is more related to population and elector statistics. And if I read the information correctly, it appears that the population of Kings has gone up by a little under 1,000 people if you take the 48,712, which is the last figure that was used for population numbers, and I think it was around 47,755 in 2011. But the electorate population appears to have grown by a higher margin. In other words, I look at 34,745 in the 2012 municipal election and 39,300 now. So somewhere in the range of 4,500 new electorates, but a smaller population growth. I'm assuming that's simply demographic shifts over time. Is that right?
Yeah, so I guess what I would... Sorry, yes, it does appear that the population, the electoral population has increased from the last time a study was done in 2015 through to 2022. 2022, and you're correct, the number that we understand to be correct is 39,300.
Okay. And you mentioned this in your introduction, and it's in, I think it's table 13 in the application itself, and if people want to turn it up, that's at page 67 of the PDF. Oh, sorry, we don't have the electronic. Okay, so it's table 13, page 67 of the PDF, so it's page, I don't think there's a page number on it, but it's table 13. Sorry, table 12 is what I'm looking at. Table 12, not 13, but the table that has the information about the maximum number of new voters each district can accommodate. And I was looking through that, and it appears that it ranges from 182 in District 1 to 656 in District 7. Is that what the table shows? Of new voters that could be accommodated over to maintain the plus or minus 10%.
Yeah. So sorry, could you repeat the question about that, sir?
I'm trying to make sure I understand what the table is showing. So you have the maximum number of new voters district can accommodate under voter parity restrictions. I'm looking specifically at the one that's been recommended, the 9 districts version 2. Mm-hmm. And it looks to me like it ranges from an additional 182 electorate in District 1 to 656 electors in District 7?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And are you comfortable with that potential for growth, keeping in mind this is going to be potentially for another 8 years?
Yeah, and it's with assuming the next 8 years, we're anticipating quite a bit of growth here based on what our discussions with the planning department and what has come previously, and then what we know is things that are, say, a potential in the pipeline right now. So what we were trying to do there specifically was to accommodate as many voters as we could, but at the same time not splitting communities of interest. So so it would be great if it could be a less of a spread, say, between that 182 and the 656, but it was the best under this model that we could accommodate those number of voters, but with also keeping all the other key factors in line with the voter parity and the communities of interest. So.
Sure, and I realize this is only one part of the, actually probably maybe not the biggest part of the assessment that you did, but the one that struck me was Canning, which is the lowest number, because I just did one of the planning hearings in Canning with respect to that fairly large development that's proposed for Canning. I'm just wondering if that had any impact at all on how you were looking at these numbers.
It certainly did, and it would have been great, I think, if we could have allowed for additional voters in District 1, but at the same time, what we're seeing is that the growth isn't only going to just be in District 1, it's actually looking like it's spread out throughout the county. So what we kind of anticipate is that as the growth happens everywhere, the rising tide floats all boats scenario. So even though right now, looking at these numbers, it only looks like we can accommodate 182 additional voters in District 1. If everything rises as we expect it to, then we will be able to accommodate more growth that way. Basically, the average number of voters per district will go up if the growth happens the way we anticipated.
Okay. The only other reason why I was thinking of District 1 is because you mentioned Centerville as being also a growth center, and I'm not sure if there's any planned development at this stage, but it is a growth center, and that's in that same district, correct?
Right.
Okay, I'm going to turn to community engagement, and obviously there's a well-detailed plan and what was done in Appendix B. But what struck me, and this is at page 23 of the actual application, was the answer to question 19. And as I read the figure in that question, the graph, the bar graph, it looked like over 76% or over 75% of respondents to the online survey heard about the application through either social media, online advertising, essentially digital and electronic means, as opposed to your traditional print and radio ads, which appeared to have a fairly small number there, I think around 5% that heard of it through that way. Do you know, because I'm assuming, I know King's does a lot of engagement on various issues, do these numbers reflect generally what you're seeing when people tell you how they've heard about various applications?
Yes, sir. I do believe that is the case from the discussions I've had with our communications specialist, that the main way people are hearing about things, even though we do spread it around obviously quite a bit, that the most effective way these days has been through the social media efforts that we do. And I do believe that's reflective of the amount of likes and reshares and all that sort of stuff that, to be honest, I'm not all that up on, but
Sure.
That's what I've been told, is that it generally is the best way we're getting the message out these days, and along with flyer services tends to help out as well, and in a more traditional method that people are used to, and especially the people that aren't necessarily tech savvy or on the internet. So that's again why we try to spread it around, is that we can't touch everybody with the social media, but sure, we do get quite a bit of reach that way.
I'm just wondering what if you look at, for example, relative cost, because my understanding is that newspaper advertisements can be relatively expensive. I'm not sure what radio ads are these days, but I'm assuming that it costs a lot less to do with social media as well than it does for.
Yeah, the social media cost is really, I think, like pretty minimal if you were to compare them to the costs for the radio and the print ads. They're quite expensive. So, I think that's largely because radio and print media are suffering in ways that maybe weren't expected 20 years ago. But so there are significantly higher costs to do those types of ads. So we can, by mixing it around more and focusing on social media, can get a better message out for a better cost.
Sure. Just a sec. With respect to the 5 public meetings, I'll call them, and I realized there were some that also had a virtual component, correct?
Yes, sir. There were 2 of the meetings that were held here in the chambers where people were permitted to join virtually, though it was kind of low. Not a lot of people did.
Sure. Yes, well, combined, I counted 30 people that attended. If you take all 5 meetings together and you add in I think it was maybe 4 people that attended virtually, you got 30 people. So I'm just wondering, because obviously there was a lot of communication, a lot of advertisement. Do you have any idea why so few people would show up for these events?
I think, and I think I can probably speak for everybody in this room, that COVID played a big part in that. And I think some of the people that did participate in the meeting were masked at that point, but I think that was probably the largest reason that kept people away. It certainly wasn't weather. I remember the days being quite nice, and you know, that has impacted stuff if we have like winter events or that sort of thing, but I don't think weather was a reason, so I think more it was likely COVID related.
But the response rate, I think it was 301 people responded to the online survey, is that right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
All right. And you've already indicated this, and it's in the application, but you went through this morning the various people from the staff that were involved in preparing the application. The scope of the exercise, was that essentially what was decided in the initial council meeting on February 15th of 2022? What was going to happen?
I will take that question through you to the chair. We initially brought to council a proposal to engage a consultant to look after the public engagement part of the study, and the rest of the work would be done in-house. Council agreed with that approach initially, so we issued an RFP. Unfortunately, we only received 2 proposals in response to that RFP, and both of those proposals were deemed unsatisfactory by the evaluation committee. So then we had to change course. We went back to council with a proposal to do the full study in-house. We felt confident that that approach would work because of the expertise that we do have in-house. So that's why we ended up with an internal study.
Okay. Who prepared the online survey?
Through the chair to you, it was mostly our policy analyst who developed the survey questions, both the council survey and the online public survey. Mm-hmm. We did have, I'm trying to recall, 2 sort of experts, subject matter experts review the questions.
Do you recall if they had any suggestions for changes when they reviewed them?
They did provide some direction, I recall, but overall they thought that the questions were very appropriate.
Okay. In return to, and this was raised again in your opening presentation, and it permeates in the application itself, but it's the question of villages and trying to keep villages intact in one district if possible. And as I understand it, leaving aside the fact that Kingston and Greenwood were combined in one district, but all the villages were kept intact as far as voting in a particular polling district, is that except for Cornwall Square. Would that be accurate?
Yes, sir, that would be correct.
Okay. And there are no villages that have a large enough population to create a polling district for a village by itself. Is that correct as well?
Sorry, through the chair. Yes, that's correct. If we had just used a village to be its own district, I believe none of them would meet that minus 10% threshold.
So it would mean you have to have a lot more districts in order to do that?
Yes, in order to do that, yeah, we would have to have looked more into that 10, 11, 12 councillor kind of scenario.
Right. Greenwich. With respect to Cornwallis Square, if I understand correctly, it's composed of the communities of Grafton, Woodville, Waterville, and Cambridge, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. And if I riding through here as you when looking at the maps, my recollection is that Granville and Woodville would be on the north side of Highway 101, and Cambridge and Waterville would be on the south side of Highway 101. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, Grafton and Woodville would be on the north side of the 101 in that arrangement, and Waterville and Cambridge would be on the south. It would also encompass the Annapolis Valley First Nation.
Yes. Yes. Which is right in the center of that portion that's below or south of the 101. Okay. And Grafton and Woodville would be entirely within District 3, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And Cambridge and Waterville, mostly in District 6, but is there I think there's a part perhaps at the southern end of the boundary that might be in another district? I wasn't quite sure. I was looking at the map. I'm pretty sure that's right, but.
Yes, sir. There would be small portions of the area of Waterville and Cambridge that would be part of District 7, but the central core of both would be within District 6.
And could I ask the reason why they couldn't be entirely included in District 6? Does it have to do with the voter parity issues that we discussed previously?
Well, some of these areas were added into the proposed District 6, specific to kind of engagement comments and both the council and public surveys. But if we had included all of that, then District 7, which is already kind of on the low end of the population scale, would have had issues with voter parity. So, and because it's, there is a bit, yeah, so that would be the main reason, yes.
Because I realize you mentioned this, and it was in the discussion in the application. There were issues that were raised during part of the public engagement about the boundaries between District 6 and District 7 that impacted on this chain or in this boundary line.
Yes, exactly. So there was very specific areas that kept getting mentioned over and over that more closely associated themselves with, say, Colebrook or Cambridge or Waterville. As opposed to, say, the more rural District 7, and so we accommodated that with our proposal.
Do you know how many electors there are in the Annapolis Valley First Nation?
To our knowledge, there's 103 voters in the Annapolis Valley First Nation.
And do you have the same information for Gluska?
Yes, we understand it's 58 voters.
And I'm just looking at some of the communities of interest. The Gibson's Wood area that you combined into one, to make sure it's in one district. Do you know what the population of that area is?
Bear with us one second,
Sure.
sir.
Take your time.
By our calculations, sir, it is 36 voters.
Okay, thanks. So leaving aside Cornwallis Square, the Kingston and Greenwood villages are in one district, and that's the only district that has two villages within that district, two entire villages within that district, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And from the point of view of, obviously I've traveled to Kingston and Greenwood on many occasions. From a community of interest point of view, could you just elaborate on why those two villages would form a community of interest?
Well, it certainly came up a lot at the public engagement sessions, and then was further noted in the online survey, both the public and the council survey, and effectively, what we found was that the villages of Kingston and the village of Greenwood, though they are separate villages, they do think of themselves as one community, so that community of interest. And because it kept getting brought up, like, why are some of us in District 5 and why are some of us in District 4, that we heard repeatedly. So that was basically the main reason why we tried to combine them into one, because based on everything we heard, we would have been splitting up a community of interest if we hadn't done that.
And when you're driving through, if you were not familiar with the area and you didn't know, and there was no sign, would it be kind of hard to tell that there is a separate village between the two, or two separate villages?
Yes, sir, I would concur with that.
All right. Can I turn to the growth centers, because you've discussed the other villages in your opening statements. On page 10 of the application, you list the 12 growth centers. 12, is it 12? I may have misread that. 12, yeah. 12, yeah. And I think we've discussed almost all those communities, the villages and the communities of Cambridge and Waterville and so forth. And you've mentioned Centerville. So the only two that I don't think have been raised specifically, you did mention North Kenville as being part of a community of interest. What about Hants Border? How is that factored? Is the entire growth center of Hants Border within one district?
Yes, sir. Hants Border is right out at the eastern portion of the County of Kings, and it actually abuts Hants County. So it's completely within District 9.
Okay. I have a question about general service areas, because that's also discussed with various boundaries. And perhaps you could just clarify to begin with, what are the general service areas? What are they? What are their purpose? How are they developed?
So a general service area it's generally analogous to a traditional community, and they were incorporated for 911 purposes. Their instinct, but the difference between a community and a GSA is that the GSAs encompass the entire county, and all areas of the province, actually. And so an inhabited area could also be assigned a GSA,
yes.
So possibly where there's no voters.
Yeah. Okay. And I think the 142 number that's referenced are the GSAs that have voters, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. And as I understand it, now there are only 6 of these GSAs that are divided between polling, in other words, that are in more than one polling district. Is that right?
Yes, sir. So that was part of, if we're comparing the status quo scenario, 24 of those 142 GSAs are divided in some way, whereas under the proposed, the recommended configuration, it is only 6 of 142. So fewer divisions of GSAs as part of this recommended configuration.
Okay. And turning to specific communities of interest, as opposed to these more general concepts, am I correct that from a perspective of, let's say, ethnicity, of perhaps historically marginalized groups, that the 2 First Nations, Glooscap and Annapolis Valley, and the African Nova Scotian community of Gibson's Woods might be the 3 main areas of focus when you're looking at that type of consideration?
Sorry, what sort of consideration?
Well, what you're looking, because one of the factors that was discussed as being a community of interest in the Halifax regional municipality case was ethnicity, but I think that really related to cultural ethnicity and perhaps traditionally marginalized or historically marginalized communities in Canada. And so I'm just wondering if those were those 3 communities would be the ones that might be the most of interest in Kings County, or to be considered in Kings County.
I can agree with that statement, sir. I think based on our engagement process, those were the 3 that were brought up most consistently. There is the historical African Nova Scotian community of Pine Woods is also one that I think was mentioned a few times, but it got less. It was talked about less. It's now renamed Aldershot, which is where the base is. So for as far as what the community expressed to us and what we focused on, it was the 2 First Nation communities in District 9 and District 6 respectively, and then focusing on Gibson Woods because of it being currently split between 2. We really tried to improve on that.
Yeah. And I'm assuming because the 2 First Nations are relatively far apart geographically and have relatively small numbers, that it was impossible to place them in one district?
Yes, for both of the First Nations, because of their orientation within those districts, and with any of the adjustments that we made or have proposed for those districts, they wouldn't have been impacted in any way.
All right, I think you've already answered my question about some specific issues arising from the public engagement. Comparable municipalities, because you did do a comparison with respect to the number of districts and so forth, with 3 comparators, which I believe are CBRM, Municipality of the District of Lunenburg, and the Municipality of the County of Colchester. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And if I understood correctly, uniform assessment totals and population density were the factors used in the selection process. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. How we selected our municipal cohorts was we used both uniform assessment and population per square kilometer, and we looked at which municipalities were plus or minus 40% of those values. And what we found is that there were really only 3 that fell under that kind of review, and then. And if I can kind of generalize what the numbers tell us on that table is that really we don't really have a cohort. Like, we are kind of in a way a special beast, that the way the numbers work out, that we're not similar enough to Cape Breton Regional Municipality because of their large population, whereas the districts of Lunenburg and Colchester, their numbers, as we show there, are quite different than ours. So that's kind of what I would say, is that we're kind of our own kind of thing, as it were.
Can I ask you why you use those 2 factors of uniform assessment and population density for the exercise?
I would say because we were trying to find out if there were other municipalities that were similar to us, and so the population per square kilometer calculation is a relatively easy one, and it's is something that's easy to compare apples to apples, and then of course everybody uses the uniform assessment as part of their municipal budgeting process and that sort of thing.
Through the chair, it's something that we struggle with here in the municipality, and I think everyone tends to think they're special. But in our case, there is a drop when you come down between Halifax CBRM and then us, and then to our next closest, there's a significant drop. So it's to try to find that common denominator that works, and it's a bit difficult. So, for example, if we compare ourselves for other purposes outside of this to CBRM, CBRM does their own waste management. They have their own transit system. We have intermunicipal service agreements here that do that. So those were the closest metrics that we could find to put us on an equal footing with other municipal units.
Okay.
But it is a bit of a problem of picking those metrics. I'll be transparent about that.
All right. I'm going to turn to assessment of the options, and in particular, I was interested in the assessment, the scenarios, alternative assessment tool. How was that tool developed?
So what we were using was our key factors, and then trying to come up with statements that would reflect those key factors, so that then our team members could then independently score, how they feel about the different scenarios through their own personal lenses.
And I think you already mentioned that, but the factors are chosen based on the requirements of the Municipal Government Act and some of the case law that's been developed by this board, I suppose. Those are factors.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I think you just said it, but staff members that were involved in the project individually used the tool to assess the outcomes?
Yeah, we were attempting to have a quantitative way of measuring our alternatives, so that it wasn't like just a personal bias picking what we thought would be the best. So each member was tasked to score each of the statements, and then we did the quantitative review of that.
And I don't know if we need to turn to it, but table 13 and 14 show the results of the tabulation of those numbers. And if I'm understanding correctly, alternative 3 version 2 scored highest on both an average and a mean score basis. Is that correct?
Yes, the alternative 3, which was ultimately the recommended configuration, scored in first place on both using the median and the average. Sorry, yeah, median and the average.
And although this is not part of the, or at least not specifically part of the assessment tool, it appeared to me that was also the one that had the smallest range in the voter parity figures. It was from 5.82% to 4.82%, plus 5.82 to minus 4.82. Is that your recollection? It's the smallest range?
Yeah, exactly. That would be a good way of describing that, that it was more evenly spread throughout the 9 districts that way.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Ms. McManus?
Thank you. Good morning. Just have to turn to mine now. So I just wanted to ask Mr. Hagan a question about, I didn't read, was a print survey used? You spoke of the online survey, but was there a print survey as well?
We didn't have a print survey issued to the public. No, it was all online. People that participated at the public engagement events could have had access to a printed version, which would then be entered in to the online survey. But to my recollection, no one did that at that time. It was all done online.
Okay. And what was your thinking in not including a print survey? Why did you opt just to have an online survey?
Thank you. Through the chair, to my recollection, we considered, having an online survey available, would be beneficial for those members of the public that, feel more comfortable providing feedback that way. And because we organized in-person engagement sessions, we I guess didn't really think it would be necessary to have printed or a print version available as well. As Mr. Hagan just mentioned, we did have copies printed off of the online survey at the public engagement sessions. Thinking we'd be able to hand those out for them to provide additional feedback. But I also, to my recollection, that was those printed copies were not used.
Okay, thank you. And just staying with public participation for a few moments, once the recommendation was made on alternate 3 or for that to be the recommendation for the boundaries, was that made available to the public to comment on before it went to council?
To answer your question, it wasn't posted online or anything like that for public comment, but the recommendations first came to committee of the whole in November, and then again were presented to council in December. So there were two there were 2 events where public would have seen what we were proposing and could have provided comment subsequent to that.
But just to clarify, but it wasn't posted on the website, so unless the public attended the meetings or participated virtually, they wouldn't have known of the recommendation or the new boundaries proposed?
If I may answer that question through the chair, the final public engagement session that we had, that was held here in Colebrook, was intended to be a session, sort of a what we heard session. So we did provide that opportunity at that point for members of the public to be made aware of what our recommendation would be. Just to check back in with members of the public that what we thought we heard was indeed what we heard correctly. So we did have that final session as a public engagement session.
Okay. And is the agenda for the whole committee or for council, is that posted in advance so the public would know this discussion of the boundaries would be coming up in the meetings?
Yes, we do post all of our agenda packages online, I don't know if it was already mentioned, but it first went to the Committee of the Whole for an extensive presentation of the findings and the public feedback. And then, based on that information provided at Committee of the Whole, we went to Council for the final recommendation.
And this may be difficult to answer, but do you recall was there public in attendance and in what numbers for the Committee of the Whole?
To my recollection, we did not have members of the public in attendance, unfortunately.
Okay, and in the same question for the council meeting that voted? Was there public in attendance?
That would be the same response. What I don't recall, we have live video and audio broadcasts of our Committee of the Whole and Council meetings, and I would have to check to see how many members of the public viewed those live broadcasts.
Okay.
I don't have that information available.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to change gears a little bit. It came out a bit when I read the responses by the councillor to the survey, and just a bit of a discussion about the workload, some questions around that for councillors. Am I correct that councillors are part-time?
Through the chair, it's not so much really a matter of whether they're part-time or full-time. I suppose each individual councillor spends as much time on their responsibilities as a councillor as they can. Some councillors have full-time positions. So they do what they can. In terms of workload, what we took into consideration, for example, is that all councillors are members of, not just council, but also boards and committees. And that's a fairly heavy workload per individual councillor.
Do you have a sense of, so you mentioned, just to get a sense of the makeup, so a portion of the councillors work full-time in another position. So this is an undertaking that they do as councillor in their outside of their other work hours. Roughly how much a week do you have a sense with committee? Maybe I apologize, I'll start. How frequently does council meet? Is it a monthly meeting?
We have one monthly Committee of the Whole meeting and one monthly council meeting. We often have at least one special council a month as well, and sometimes more.
And are there additional committees that councillors participate in or members of?
Yes, I would say that the workload per councillor in that sense is probably about 5 or 6 boards and committees that they sit on as well. And so those are both committees of council as well as external boards.
So this may be difficult, and please, if you can't answer, but would it be fair to say then, that they have 5 to 10 hours a week, or perhaps more than that, in their commitments as counselor?
To you through the chair, I hesitate to actually give out a number. I'm sure it varies a lot per counselor, and it's, it's hard to estimate. It would be possible for us to estimate the time they spend at meetings, but then of course there's also meeting preparation, and they spend quite a bit of time communicating with constituents as well, for example. Some councillors who have villages in their districts, they would attend village commission meetings. So it's hard to actually put a number of hours to that.
And just following up on that, you mentioned the villages and the additional. Was that part of the reason? I did hear that through, in reading the surveys and the responses, that having more than one village in a district increases the amount of workload for a councillor. Was that part of the consideration?
That's correct. For example, District 1 would have had both the villages of Canning and Port Williams, or that's the current situation, and those two villages are now spread over 2 districts, and I would imagine that would make a difference in their workload.
Okay.
Nomination meets how many times? Once a year to rebalance?
Yes.
So it's-
Yep.
Mr. Chair, if I could add one point to the member's question about workload. We have a structure here through a nomination committee, and so at least once a year there's a rebalancing if there's a council desire to shift between who serves on, say, an intermunicipal service corporation board, an external agency, or a direct municipal appointment. So there is a balancing of the workload that happens once a year through that nominating committee.
Thank you. That's helpful to know. And maybe, Mr. Conrad, I'll just take the moment to ask a question for you of how do you find your role as the Chief Administrative Officer in terms, are you pleased with the cooperation with the council and the way that you're able to perform your role?
Thank you, through the chair. My role in King's is it's almost excellent in terms of the differentiation between administration and policy. So the council here really views themselves as a policy-oriented board, and administration is administration. So they direct us through policy, and we're expected to be held accountable to that policy, but there's a clear role.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you. I have a few questions that have been canvassed. I noticed the public engagement session, the second one on October 3rd in Colebrook. It was the citizen appointees to municipal standing committees were invited. Just I found that interesting. That was a new concept I hadn't really seen before in other areas. Just explain briefly the significance of, and that was actually your, perhaps not surprisingly, your most best attended. How that sort of came about generally in terms of consulting that particular group.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I recall correctly, that was an idea from the CAO to have an engagement session for citizen members on our committees. The thinking behind that was that they obviously already have an interest in municipal government. It's obvious from the attendance at other public engagement sessions for the general public that it's a challenge to get people interested. And so we were hoping that that would, generate some more attendance, and it turned out to be the case. And I was not at that session myself, but I do know that there were some very lively and valuable discussions.
Mr. Melanson went through the various questions I had about the villages and the growth centers, so I won't ask you any questions about that. But is it fair to say that, based on, is it fair to say that in terms of looking at configurations, obviously the corridor of the Highway Number 1, Highway 101 through the municipality sort of informs sort of the exercise in terms of how you're going to, and the growth centers and villages. I mean, those two factors really are, in terms of starting to configure polling districts, really instructs your sort of exercise, doesn't it? I realize there's density outside those areas, but generally, communities of interest and the major growth centers, villages are within those corridors.
Yes, sir, I would say that's correct, particularly for like kind of central and western Kings. It is an important kind of, boundary, as it were, of the districts, and did kind of inform certain orientations, but on some of the other iterations that we had looked at, it wouldn't have, because you're, especially when you're trying to get into, 11 and 12 district models and sort of that sort of thing, it did change a bit. We had some, the towns also create a, kind of a borderland for some of our districts as well as the highway. So I guess, yeah, that's the answer to your question, sorry.
I had one question, this perhaps more of interest than anything else, but in your presentation, it's Appendix D, and it's the presentation for the 5th session. I can give you a PDF if you want. Find my sheet. It would be PDF 173, if that helps. And it's the slide number 34 about district boundaries. And the second bullet there talks about ethno-cultural communities of interest identified for consideration. It talks about the First Nations we've talked about, Gibson Woods we've talked about, and then it says the Grand Prairie Acadian community. Is that, I wasn't aware that there was actually an Acadian community there still there. Just, is that more related to the historical significance and the historical designation of that site? That is that what was meant by that community of interest?
Yes, sir. I would say that would be correct. And because it exists, solely within District 9, we weren't playing with any boundaries in that historical Acadian community area of Grand Prairie. So, and my apologies for not mentioning that as
that's no problem.
in the presentation.
I was just wondering. It's a matter of interest more than anything. So, thank you. So, as I understand, when you started the review, and here perhaps I'll take you to your November 10th, 2022 report to Committee of the Whole, and that would be Appendix E. I'm not sure of the PDF page, but it's a November 10th report. It would be somewhere after page 206, yeah. So you, on the page 5 of that report to Committee of the Whole, you said that staff initially prepared 12 scenarios, and those scenarios were obviously across the board, and then you narrowed it down to 5 scenarios. So I'm just wondering, I wasn't quite clear, and of course those scenarios included up to 12 districts. What was the timing of, in terms of preparing those 12 those 12 alternatives, and reducing them to 5? What was the timing in relation to how your public consultation proceeded? Sort of, at what point did you narrow it down to 5?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. The 5 would have been shortlisted prior to the 5th public engagement session. So we had started, kind of started big and then narrowed down based on the feedback we got from the public information sessions, but also kind of with the online survey, because it was a long time that was active, so we could kind of follow along during that process of what people were saying. So yeah, that's my recollection, is that they were narrowed down to 5 right around the same time as the 5th public engagement session, and then further developed.
So let's say like the very first public information session, which was September 27th, would you still have had the 12 alternatives available, or had you already reduced them by then?
At that time, we hadn't started developing any alternatives,
Oh, I
so
see.
there was none. It would have been more October 2022 when we started actual alternative development.
Okay.
So it would, yeah, for sure.
So had you actually gone through the exercise when you did the 12 of actually preparing maps and so forth of all the scenarios, or did you just prepare the maps when you get down to the final 5?
I would say when we had the original 12 that we were looking at, a lot of them were just sketches where we were kind of thinking about how that could look, and then really delving into the numbers in GIS. So I don't think we ever had like proper consumption ready maps of those 12 originals. We didn't get into the really developing them until we kind of had till we had draft versions of the 5 before they were presented to others outside of the boundary review team. But that was kind of the process. That so they wouldn't we wouldn't have never had final versions of some of the more the 12 in the end members of the 12 district the 12 iterations that we had to begin with.
Okay, and I'm not being critical or anything. I'm just because 12 scenarios would have been a lot to prepare, so I wasn't expecting that you would, but I was just more worried about the timing, or sorry, just questions about the timing. So as the 5 sessions proceeded between September 27th, 2022 and October 20, 2022, which is essentially almost a month, that's when you started developing the 5 scenarios. And I think by the time of the 5th session, you did actually start, did you actually, yeah, there were no, like in the 5th session, you didn't present the 5 maps, the 5 alternatives, the mapping of it, you didn't present those at the public sessions.
That's correct, sir. The public engagement session was more to confirm with people that what we had heard at the previous 4 sessions was consistent with what they had, spoken to us about. But the elements of what became the 5 different alternatives that we prepared were what we had heard from those sessions, and what we responded to in that fifth session would have been reflected in the actual ultimate 5 iterations that we prepared.
Yeah. And in fairness, you on page 35 of that presentation, of the presentation in the fifth public engagement session, you actually identified, that was in Appendix D, but your presentation for your public engagement session 5, you did actually review with, in that session, obviously the First Nations communities, Gibson Woods community, and the 4 areas that had been identified for consideration or for review: the Kingston Greenwood issue, Gibson Woods, Centerville, White Rock, Deep Hollow Brook, and East Berwick. So by the time of the 5th session, you had actually identified those from your prior consultation.
Yes, sir, that's correct. So those kind of key areas that for us to focus on were kind of evident from the get-go, and so by that 5th session, we kind of knew where the public wanted us to concentrate our efforts, and then that informed where we went with the development of the 5 scenarios.
Okay. And the 5 sessions were actually sort of an iterative process. You actually, it wasn't sort of the same presentation at all 5. Going through them, you actually see how they developed as the consultation was proceeding.
Yes, sir, that's correct. And that's largely to do with the boundary review team and the involvement of everybody. So then new ideas coming forth and whatever had come from the previous event, we tried to incorporate so that we're kind of building on the process as we went, so that it wasn't, we didn't want it to be a repetitive thing for ourselves as well.
Did you have repeat attendance, people that, just from your knowledge, people that attended multiple times?
I do believe we did, sir. I couldn't tell you their specific names necessarily, but I believe there were people that came to.
Mr. Kane says he was here, several of them, so, okay. This might be a little unfair, but in terms of how when the team was examining, I'm particularly interested in the 3 9 scenarios, the status quo, version 1 and version 2. Version 2 is the one you're recommending. Obviously, I've gone through the maps. Could you provide, is it possible for you to explain generally what the difference was between those 3 scenarios?
Yes, sir, I can. The status quo, I think, was also, we have those individual maps in the report, but if I kind of go over a general overview going from west to east, the status quo has issues with District 4 currently because half of Greenwood is part of District 4 and half of Greenwood is part of District 5, and which is also similar to Aylesford, the village of Aylesford. Half of it is included in District 4 and half of it is included in District 5. So that was a problematic area that with the status quo was of issue. As we move across, we have areas where around the town of Berwick, particularly, where District 7 is kind of encompassing the western, southern, and eastern edges of Berwick, and then if we move further east, we get to District 8, which is New Minas and Greenwich, where we have a bit of District 7 curling around the eastern portion of the village of New Minas. So those were areas that, again, we've kind of talked about, but those were kind of problematic areas with the status quo that made it not necessarily desirable. If we look at the numbers for the percent variation from the average, the 2 things that jump out to me in the status quo scenario is that District 2 is at kind of the high end of the percent variation from the average at 7.75%. And also District 9 is at the low end of that percent variation from the average at minus 7.62%. Sorry. If we look at the 9-district model version 1, which is alternative 2, the difference in this iteration, or the main differences, would be that the Village of Kingston and the Village of Greenwood and the Department of National Defense base Greenwood are in a District 4, and then District 5 is made up of kind of eastern Kingston and the Village of Aylesford and the rural areas to the south in District 5. If we look at District 7, the relationship between Districts 6, 7, 9, and 8 are very similar in the Alternative 2 9 Districts version 1 as they are in Alternative 3 9 Districts version 2. So there's not much of a difference there. The main difference in the eastern portion of the county would be the orientations of District 2 and District 1. And in this iteration, District 1 would maintain having 2 villages in it, which would be the villages of Canning and the village of Port Williams. And District 2 was modified to extend to the north so that it wasn't splitting the African Nova Scotian community of Gibson Woods, but also not splitting the community of Centerville. And under the current status quo situation, the community of Centerville is kind of split between 2 districts, in between Districts 3 and Districts 2. So that was partially what we were trying to address under Alternative 2 9 Districts version 1. And then if we compare what I just talked about there about Alternative 2 with our Alternative 3, which was the recommended, we have District 4 being made up of the Village of Greenwood, the Village of Kingston, and then the community of East Kingston, which extends to the east past the village boundary. And then with the main difference here between what I just discussed in Alternative 2 is the orientations of Districts 1 and 2, where we effectively have got 1 village in District 1 and 1 village in District 2, and then 1 growth center in District 1 and 1 growth center in District 2. The growth center in District 1 would be Centerville, and the growth center in District 2 would be North Kentville. Sorry, Canning is a growth center as well as a village, so in essence, I'm just saying the village kind of supersedes the growth center status, but same thing goes for Port Williams. So I would say those are the main differences between Alternative 2 and Alternative 3. In summary, would be the orientation of District 4 and 5, particularly in the west, and the orientations of Districts 1 and 2 in the east make up the primary differences. I mean, there's probably some very other minor little things going on, but those would be the significant differences there, sir.
That's helpful. Thank you very much. So in both, and I'll call it not the status quo, but 9 Districts version 1 and 9 Districts version 2, the recommended, the scenarios in terms of Berwick, they stay the same there. It's more in the eastern western end that the changes occur between those 2 versions.
Yes, sir, I do believe that's correct. The central portions of both alternatives are generally the same recommendation.
Okay. Your analysis, and Mr. Melanson brought you to that tables 13 and 14. That's the staff analysis. So table 13, just for the purposes of the transcript, table 13 is at PDF page 68, and table 14 is at PDF page 69. So just going through the various factors, you identified 10 factors. Those are factors that the team put together.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And if I recall from your presentation, there were 7 people on your team.
Yes, sir.
And before I forget, actually, could you file a copy as an undertaking, just a copy of that PowerPoint you presented to us this morning? You can just provide that. We'll send you a reminder after the hearing. Just provide it to Mr. Kiley, the clerk at the board. So in terms of those factors, just comparing them to section 368, 368.4 of the Act, just going through them, number 1 is relative parity of voting power. That would be in the section 368, correct? Oh, sorry. Yes? Yeah.
Yes, I believe so, sir.
So in terms, and I'll just read it, section 368.4, in determining the number of boundaries of polling districts, the board shall consider the number of electors, relative parity of voting power, population density, community of interest, and geographic size. So for my review, that section 368.4 would be sort of translated into these factors. Factor 1, relative parity of voting power.
Sorry, yes, sir.
Yeah. Communities of interest. Number 2.
Yes, sir.
Number 5, the geographic size will generally be consistent with that.
Yes, sir.
6, the number of electors.
Yes, sir.
And 7, the population density.
Yes, sir.
So that's 5 of the 10. And then the other factors, just to confirm, maybe starting from the bottom, number 10 is the proposed number of councillors and district boundaries are deemed to be appropriate and fair. Would it be fair to say that that's roughly equivalent to section 368.5, which requires the municipality to do a study of the appropriateness and the reasonableness of the polling districts? So that factor 10 is really sort of equivalent to that factor, isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So number 9 was the workload. That's understandable. That's councillor workload. Number 8 was consideration of underrepresented communities. Number 4, population growth, which is obviously a fair factor to consider. And then the third factor, it says the number of councillors districts proposed are consistent with general public comments and council comments received by the municipality essentially during the survey and the public engagement sessions. So is that sort of a catch-all of everything else? Because a lot of those factors talked about in the public engagement would in these other factors would have been talked about in those sessions, correct?
Yes, I guess you're correct there, sir, that it is a bit of a catch-all, but
Yeah.
but we were trying to be reflective of the engagement process. Yeah.
Right, okay. The weighting factor, just interested in how you came up with the weighting percentage for each of those factors. I note that the two larger ones, 20%, are the relative parity of voting power, and then number 10, the appropriateness and fairness of the districts. The third one is communities of interest, and the fourth one was 10%, the number of electors. So those four by themselves come up to 40, come up to 60, actually close to 60%, or sorry, 40, 50, actually, yeah, 62%. So a larger percentage was weighted towards the factors outlined in the Act, but just wondering how you came up with that general weighting.
Mr. Chair, It was a collaborative process of our boundary review team. So after we came up with our list of 10 factors for consideration, we then met to talk about people's thoughts on the weighting percentage of each, and that was done before. Well, I guess I should back up. So we came up with the list of factors for consideration, and then then we discussed what an appropriate weighting percentage would be for each of them based on everybody's input. And so, some of them are higher and lower based, if other, it wasn't universal, and it wasn't, say me just saying we're going to go with 20 on this one and 10 on this one. It had to be collaborated. It was a collaborative process. So at the end, some give and take happened to make the numbers the way we decided to weight them.
Okay. Going through them, I actually had there's one ranking that sort of took me by surprise. And if you look at number 8, this is in table 13, number 8, in terms of the taking into consideration the underrepresented communities, version 1 of the 9 districts was 4.3. Version 2 was only 3.1. That was actually one of the lowest rankings. But at least in relation to Gibson Woods, version 2 does account for that. And in terms of the First Nations, you wouldn't bring them, it wouldn't be possible to put them in the same district in any event. So I was just quite surprised why version 1 would have scored higher than version 2.
I agree, sir.
Okay.
It was interesting to see it come out that way, okay. Because, like you said, underrepresented communities, I think, are effectively addressed under both alternative 2 and 3 in a similar manner. So it was surprising to see such a difference, and that may just be an artifact of 7 different people with different backgrounds and how they approached the scoring themselves. And I can't, we kind of did it blind, so that I don't know who actually put what numbers into things. So I can't really account for it, whether, specifically why that happened, but it was interesting for sure.
Okay. So, coming back to your report to the Committee of the Whole, the November 10th, 2022 report. And I'll take you, that's in Appendix E, and then it's PDF page 281. I'm not sure if that helps you. Just a couple of questions there, and I'm going to compare it to your final report to Council, which I'll just say now is PDF page 299. So, again, the report to Committee of the Whole. The first question: was there any change in Alternative 3? 9 districts version 2. Was there any change at all in the boundaries between the meeting of the Committee of the Whole and the council meeting on December 6, 2022?
Yes, there was, sir.
Okay. So if we look at PDF page 281, so that is on page 8 of 9 of that report. It says additional commentary on preferred alternative. Do you have that? Okay. So there you go through essentially a lot of the factors you noted today in terms of the villages, the first bullet. The second bullet was the orientation of districts 1 and 2 in the north-south orientation. The third bullet was a Deep Hollow Road, White Rock Road issue. The next bullet was in relation to the town of Berwick. And then the next bullet, Districts 4 and 5, the Kingston Greenwood issue. And then there was another bullet, proposed District 7, and there was some land areas added that were previously in District 5. So I don't know if you can keep an electronic finger on that, but also go to PDF page 299, which is your report to council on December 6, 2022. And there, PDF 299, so that would be the second page of your report. There are also bullets there that talk about, again, the first bullet is the talking about the villages. The second is the orientation of districts 1 and 2. The next two bullets talk about Kingston, Greenwood, Aylesford, and Greenwood, the changes that took place between districts 4 and 5. And then there's another bullet there about the general service areas. So when I was comparing those two between both meetings, it looked like there was a lot more detail about Kingston and Greenwood in your second report of December 6th. So, long question, but finally getting to the end of it. If there were changes between the boundary scenarios that you presented, what were they, and was there a difference in terms of particularly Greenwood and Kingston from what had been presented in on November 10th?
Yes, sir. So there were changes in Western Kings. So at the Committee of the Whole in November, our original recommendation for Alternative 3 was that Kingston and Aylesford and the areas in between Kingston and Aylesford along Highway 1 would have been included in District 4 at that time, whereas Greenwood would stay, or Greenwood, all of the village of Greenwood would have been part of District 5. And what the feedback we got from the Committee of the Whole meeting was that we should basically, that as the concern was whether that we could accommodate growth, future growth, the best that we could in Western Kings, considering that the predominant area of growth in Western Kings is going to be in Kingston and Greenwood. So ultimately, we could accommodate for more voters if we kept the communities of interest of Kingston and Greenwood together in one district, like we have proposed, that we ultimately proposed in the December council meeting, versus the trying to keep Kingston and Aylesford and the areas along Highway 1 in between them as effectively District 4. So that was the change, and the impetus for the change was to accommodate growth. So that's how we handled that in between the Committee of the Whole meeting and the final recommendation at Council.
Okay, so the only change between the November meeting and the December meeting was in relation to Districts 4 and 5?
Yes.
Oh, okay, okay. So in that report of November 10th, you actually had, I don't know if you had individual maps, but you did have, you actually did have figures 1, 2, and 3 showing alternative 1, alternative 2, and alternative 3. They actually had the other 2 alternatives as well, but in terms of the 9, you had those 3 mapped. So when you came to council, I don't recall if I actually saw any maps attached to your report in December, but actually the map would have changed.
Sorry. Yes, it did change. So, and effectively, in the council, in the Committee of the Whole meeting in November, District 4 was represented from Kingston through to encompass Aylesford, more of a long district. And then the subsequent district that we came up with was keeping all of Greenwood and all of Kingston as one district, and then the Aylesford area was part of District 5.
Okay. And again, that was the only change between November and December.
I do believe that to be correct, sir. Like, I mean, there could have been like minor little things changed, but
yeah.
like of something substantial, yes, that was the only thing that you'd kind of visually be able to see on the map that was changed.
Okay. And the relative parity of voting power that you've presented in the application, the actual application to the board, to us, is the final relative parity with those changes to 4 and 5 are made.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, if we look at the various maps, in your application, you actually have districts, all the various scenarios mapped out. And if, in terms of your PDF, starting at PDF page 91, it's figure 21.
Sorry, sir, did you say 391?
Sorry, no, 91.
Oh,
So that's figure 21. And then actually the numbers match quite nicely. District 2 is figure 22, and all the way up to figure 9 is District 9. So figures 21 to 29 from PDF pages 91 to 99, those were indicated as being the recommended configuration of polling districts, alternative number 3, which is version 2. So those are the maps that you're they're dated November 2022, and I don't see a more, I might be mistaken, or maybe there is, sorry, actually. Let me just check my notes here. I'm just wondering, that's the version that was presented in November. Do we have a more current version of those districts after the council meeting?
no, sir, that would be an error on my part, that those two figures 24 and figures 25 should say December 2022 and not November 2022. They have, those were updated.
Oh, just for those two, okay.
Just only those two.
All right, okay. Okay, so what we'll do is, after we've done our deliberations, when we come back, once we approve the final version, we'll probably need updated maps in any event to take out sort of the recommended, this would be District 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so we'd ask you to refile that at some point, assuming we approve this application.
Sir, at that time, would we then, we would update
do
the
all
date at that time?
We'll do all 9.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
Yep. I think that's it. Yeah, so looking at the order from last time, traditionally we had done written descriptions, but over the last few reviews, municipalities have gone to the mapping, GIS mapping, so I assume you'd want to continue that in this application, the mapping as opposed to written descriptions.
Yes, sir, we'd like to use both the mapping and the
More
descriptions.
user-friendly?
Yeah, the mapping is great, but we did include in our application also the written descriptions as well,
Yes,
just in
right.
case for that alternative.
Right, okay. And my last question, since this matter has been advertised up to today's hearing, have anybody on the King's team, in terms of the four of you sitting here, received any comments opposing the application? I see.
No, sir, to my knowledge, we haven't received any written communication or verbal communication, telephone calls or anything like that, not in support of it.
Okay. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Kane, we've come up to the public session. If you would come up to the table here, right here on your left. Someone may have to put the microphone on. You'll just press the button in front of you. Yep. So, Mr. Kane, you're Chris Kane?
BC Can as in canning.
Oh, Can.
Sorry, the distance.
Sorry, I apologize.
No problem.
It is spelled C-A-I-N-N?
C-A-N-N.
Oh, C-A-N-N.
Yarmouth, rare Yarmouth name. Excuse me.
I know that it was spelled C-A-I-N-N, so someone made a mistake in my office. I apologize. I knew there are a
It
lot
does
of cans.
happen.
There are a lot of cans in Yarmouth County.
Right.
I worked there for a number of years. What community do you live in?
My coordinates would be 1548 and 1554 Baxter's Harbor Road
Oh, okay.
in Baxter's Harbor,
Yeah. Do you know what district that is in, roughly?
District 1.
Okay. So I'll allow you.
RR5 Canning.
Okay. You're free, give us your comments.
Okay. First, Quay, good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. It's taken me a long time to prepare. I really appreciate the questioning. I've had experience with UARB hearings, specifically the hearings on the wind farm, I suppose you call it, in South Canoe Lake. We sat with the people in the New Ross area for UARB hearing. I participated in a hearing, not to speak, but to attend, on the urban sprawl that was evolved. Pardon me for some of my language, but I'm trying to contextualize kind of the issues that were in front of the commission at the time. And I believe it was Judge Bob Levy presenting on development in the Avonport area for clarification of policy and bylaw. And also when the previous CAO was challenged here. So the long and the short of it is that I guess the best way to put this is a fair deal of experience in community economic development, and I believe that the two axes that were to be considered, in my understanding, and I was a participant at the consultation that happened to be at the diversity committee the night I walked into the diversity committee, so that explains my presence at that meeting. One of the things that I think is being missed and promises to be something I'll be paying close attention to anyway, has to do with community economic development, was not one of the axes that was considered. I guess you could put that under community of interest, because it tends to occupy a very low profile of the impact of community development on the makeup of the community, therefore, responses to where should boundary lines be, and questions of, I was heartened, your questions were excellent questions, by the way, I thought. And I've also been for 2 years at the Windsor Causeway, so I'm with First Peoples, and at the evening that we were here at the meeting, the question of that balance, for example, between how could you have a jurisdiction that was in Gliscap at the far end of the county and Annapolis Valley here, of course, it begs the question of whether or not any kind of jurisdictional impact can be had by a county jurisdiction on a federal jurisdiction. And my partner at the time, we've had to leave it, but we were about to make a presentation to clarify the difference between peoples and their government, and that on a level of, what would you call it, legislative level, of course the governments will interact. There is a discrepancy, of course, here, and we're quite aware of that. And from that, there was a realization that the issue that we were involved with at the Windsor Causeway, which was a federal issue, and it had to do with the restoration of the fishery, which science had promised was possible. And it came back to the question of productivity in our community, Baxter's Harbor. Baxter's Harbor was one of 4 communities pre-Confederation that exported not only fish and apples and so forth, but also ships entire were built in that community. Due to federal processes that have essentially brought the fishery to the state that it's in, much of it conflictual, if you recall what was going on at Saunieville, what was lost to us in the boundary process and the questions of community economic development, in other words, what benefits does the developments that were happening in the area have to the community, it occurred to me, and I'm late in the game, I'm adding a charrette to the whole process, and it's in no way a conflict with, I totally support the application, but it requires some clarifications which you brought forth most importantly. So I narrowed it down to what I was going to say, which was basically, I believe there should be a boundary change to take into the lands that have currently been rezoned in our area for a development that is a service industry, because the hamlet, so I didn't hear any discussion of the hamlet designation, but we live next to a hamlet, which is a tourist destination, and issues were arising in the community about the presence of people at the beach and parking and so on and so forth, that it would make more sense to put the service industry development, and logically in terms of which communities are going to benefit the most from it, within the ambit of Halls Harbor, while at the same time I would like to make a request that the hamlet also host some kind of learning opportunity about the real, how would I say this, the actual meaning of unceded territory. And that's really all I had to say.
In terms of your, I'm just going to, I won't let you finish, but in terms of economic development, wouldn't the concept of growth centers be implicit, would imply that that's a economic development factor that's considered?
Depends on how you define growth. Yes.
Okay.
And I understand that Canning is so designated, and Centerville. But you please understand that when people come to the area on a tourism mission, in other words, they don't plan to live here or necessarily work here, there's a whole route that people follow, and the highway systems are all laid out and named thusly in the county. Okay. So, for example, development calls for, and we've learned more recently, and part of the reason that I'm here is because of things that have developed since this process has unfolded. For instance, in Scotts Bay right now, which is definitely on the route, it's the home of creator Gliscap, and with all the attendant changes of designation of land over the years, from ownership by a large pulp and paper corporation in West Hants to the province, much of the land is migrating. I heard yesterday that 30,000 acres have been put under the care of First Nations because of the clear-cut issue. But our language doesn't permit us to speak ill. Our first official language does not permit us, does not afford us the possibility to speak ill of people. So all we can come up with are better solutions, and that's really why I'm here. I'm not interested in the issues at all.
Okay.
And more importantly, I don't want to have the issues because of our experience with industrial wind turbines in that very same community and beyond. And we were very successful in putting together the proposals for alternatives. In fact, in the province, you all actually look familiar. I don't know if you were part of those hearings at all, but sorry, I didn't mean to do it that way.
Yeah, we were in some. I obviously appreciate your comments today. I will ask the municipality to respond to the issue you raised about bringing Halls Harbor, because I know District 1 and 3 are just abut each other in that region.
Yes.
In terms of for the Indigenous peoples and their governance and those issues, all I can tell you is, in terms of the board's authority in this particular matter, it doesn't rise to that particular constitutional scale. In this case, we have a system in terms of municipal voting that we have to divide the land mass into areas and ensure obviously the factors we talked about today. So probably they don't mesh. I realize they don't mesh there, but First Nations people are obviously permitted to. They have their own governance mechanisms. And they are different, obviously, I acknowledge, than the ones under the Municipal Government Act, but you are also able to vote in the municipal elections, and this particular session is what what we're looking at today. But appreciate your comments, and I will ask the municipality about that issue between District 1 and 3.
Yeah.
And could I just ask for a clarification on that issue? Is primarily related to the fact that the route that people would take to follow the coast when you're doing a tourism trip. The communities are interrelated between Halls Harbor and Baxter's Harbor. In fact, all the way to Scotts Bay, there's a link between a highway link, basically,
starting
road
point.
link. Yeah. All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Can. I'm sorry about getting your name wrong. I actually know Can's from Yarmouth, so thank you. Thank you. Mr. Hagan, perhaps I could ask you that question in terms of the boundary. Was there any consideration of bringing those together in one sense, or another? I suppose there's two districts here.
And that's with respect to Halls Harbor and Baxter's Harbor,
Yes.
or Halls Harbor into District 1?
Yes.
Sorry. We did consider that, but one consideration is that we were trying to maintain, boundaries as many as we could, so that boundary that between District 1 and 3 in alternative number 3 is the same western boundary. Sorry. It's the same western boundary as under the status quo scenario. Thank you. So sorry, I was lost my train of thought there. We didn't change that western boundary between Districts 1 and 3. It's maintained as the Shefford Vault. It's a geographic boundary, which is the Sheffield Vault Brook. One of the reasons why we didn't consider moving Halls Harbor into District 1, the primary one, is the voter parity issue. District 3 already is one of the lower populated districts in our municipality, and if we had added the area around that would have really cut into the parity in District 3 versus District 1, and we wouldn't have had it, it would have been very difficult to accommodate any future growth in District 1 if we had done that. And so there wasn't enough public sentiment, I think, to include Halls Harbor into District 1 to necessitate that change.
Would you have the number of people in Halls Harbor in your data? That would be a GSA, correct?
Yes, sir, just bear with us while we...
Yep. And while you're looking for that, I know just from looking at the map that in terms of a transportation corridor, maybe that's not the correct word, but I note that there appears to be a major, at least a highway of some significance between Halls Harbor coming into Centerville, although there's various ways you could get to the larger areas, but is there a principal sort of transportation corridor to get to the rest of the municipality? Obviously, there's one along the shore, isn't there?
So yes, there's kind of a north-south highway running from Centerville to Halls Harbor. I beg your forgiveness, I can't remember the number of it, but I do travel it quite a bit, so I should probably know.
Is it 359? Is it
359? So one of the things we tried to not use, if we could, as part of any boundary changes, was to use roads as the determining factor of splitting districts, largely because it splits people that are neighbors generally. So that's one of the main reasons why we focus on maintaining that particular geographic boundary of the Sheffield Brook.
And that just for, that is the existing boundary, that brook?
Yes.
Right.
Which basically runs from the bay down to, I think where it juts off would be at the brow of mountain. So there is that. It's a geographic feature as well, the brow. So, but yeah, that would be, the highway is important getting to Halls Harbor for sure. There isn't any other road really that you'd want to travel closer to the bay that would connect otherwise.
Yeah.
And the voter number for Halls Harbor is approximately 264. I can't say that's exact, but.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, I think that brings us to a close today. Thank you very much for your presentation. Under the Act, under the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board Act, we have to issue a written decision. So we'll do that. We usually issue a decision. Well, our rule is 90 days, but usually it's 30 to 60 days. So hopefully we should have something back to you in a few weeks. So thank you very much for your presentation. Again, I commend you for the consultation that you undertook. It was very well done. Again, over par compared to many other municipalities in the province. So I congratulate you on that. So we'll reserve our decision, and this matter is adjourned. Thank you.